for the RCD programs. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Melissa. So for today, we are going to talk about how these different metrics are used in different RCD programs. Like we talked about how the data was collected last time, and then what do different institutes do with that collected data. So we have three speakers. Scott Dillinger from, I believe, Compute Canada. He's the, I mean, though he is, he'll talk more about what he works with the entire Canadian infrastructure and how they implement different metrics over there. Then Dave Hart again is going to talk about how the metrics are used at NCAR, and then Patrick Smith, who is going to talk about his experience at Berkeley and then his current experience, I guess, in the consulting role. So who wants to start off? I guess.
I suppose I could.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
All right. Let's get the sharing started. Okay. I think that should be visible. Yes? And I can be heard?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm located at the University of Alberta, and we participate in the National Provision of Service, what we call advanced research computing. Research computing and data is, the US term. And this is a pan-Canadian collaboration and delivery of service to researchers at all the various institutions. So I'd like to start by acknowledging our territory. The University of Alberta is located primarily on Treaty 6 lands, which is the traditional territory of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, and Anishinaabe nations. And so we respect their sovereignty and the lands that we exist on. So first, I wanted to talk about the data that we collect. I know we spoke about that a month ago, but we have basically two sets of data. We have annual account renewals, which is going on right now. So everybody that makes use of the national systems in Canada renews their account or gains their account about this time of year. And so we collect things like their name, institution, their department, their relationship to the institution, whether they're faculty or an adjunct, doctoral student, master's student, whatever it might be. And for the faculty, they have to submit a Canadian Common CV, which is a standardized, semi-standardized format, which includes their publications. So that's the information about the people, but we also gather technical data, and this is just a bunch of fields that I can have someone run a script and gather up for my institution all of this information. RAC stands for Resource Allocation Competition. So we have people who need larger amounts of resources submit an annual allocation request. There's also default use or, opportunistic use. And so between RAC and default, that's how you get your total use of core years or GPU years. So this leans more to the technical side. And so then what stories do we want to tell? So within research computing and our delivery of service to the users, we want to have an idea amongst our analysts and systems administrators, how many users are there this year from, say, our institution? What are the sizes of the research group? So we'll roll up a group under the PI, but it's always good to know, is that an early career researcher who may have 2 graduate students, or is this an established physicist who may have, or computing scientist who may have, 35 people in their group? Also, who are the big users, the volume of use, and what are their patterns? Are they a fairly steady state, or are they very bursty? When we look at the individual allocations to the groups, what did the PI request versus what were they awarded? So did they make their case for the research they want to conduct that year on those systems? If not, can we help them write a better allocation request next year? What did the group use versus their award? So sometimes they're awarded, say, 50 GPU years, and at the end of the year, you look and they've only used 25. It's going to be hard for them to make a case the following year to get 50 or more again. We analyze this quarterly to determine progress because it's always good to check in with someone who's way behind. We don't want them thinking that they're going to get 500 core years all in the month of March. Our allocation year runs April to March. So total use is the allocation plus their opportunistic use. And sometimes you'll find that a new grad student may be running everything in default submissions, which means they wait in a queue longer than if they are making use of the allocation. However, if they're just learning how to use the platforms, we don't want them using up the allocation. And so we suggest, tuning how they submit jobs a lot of the time. With respect to how we support the users, we want to keep all of this data in mind when we determine how we're going to allocate support in busy times. So, is this holding up a large group? Is this problem that they're having holding up the large group from getting work done? Or is this an early career researcher who needs help getting established and making good use of the systems? We can also figure out who to reach out to during a lull in our queuing of tickets. If there's a quiet time, maybe we can reach out to a group that seems to be underutilizing their allocation and ask if there's something holding them up, or are they just busy with like wet lab work and the like. Could a group benefit from formalizing their workflows? Sometimes new graduate students aren't in the swing of things and can benefit from some instruction on how to keep the pipeline busy. And if we see common questions, would the community benefit from delivery training around a specific topic? And do we have the subject matter expertise from which to develop that? So the data comes into me basically for my institution as a CSV file, and I put it out as in Google Data Studio for the use of our research computing support staff, but also as slides when I go to talk to, say, a dean or the vice president research or my boss, the CIO. So to that latter group, we want to inform them how many people are making use of the digital research platforms. What's that volume of use? What's the value of those consumed resources? Because everybody likes a money story. We have the value of a CPU year, a GPU year, the cloud resources, and the storage. And then we also track our training, what we offer, and how well attended these things are. In this national delivery of service in Canada, if you are not among the host sites, and only 5 institutions are, sometimes it's hard to tell that story to, say, the VPRI or a CIO, because they don't see the equipment on their campus. They don't see it in their budgets. They don't see it in their financial reporting. And so it's important to tell the story of the benefit of this collaboration when they don't see a lot of this in front of them, as they do, say, the listing of mass spectrometry laboratories around a campus and the like. Also, it's hard for them to wrap their heads around, adding a new researcher may not cost them anything for the consumption of those digital resources, because there's no marginal costs up here. If you've got one faculty member with an allocation of 500 CPU years or 1,000 CPU years, there's no cost difference to the institution or to the researcher. So where they're accustomed to paying for everything, it's always good to reset the context in which these things are delivered. So at the University of Alberta, we contribute a handful of staff to those national efforts, get partial defrayment of their salary and benefits. And then we get all of that research computing value in return back to the institution. And so when I'm talking to the VPRI or my boss, the CIO, delivering my asks for additional staff or dollars with data-informed cases is always the most effective approach. When we can show the use and what we offer to the researchers, it makes the story more compelling than, well, I'd like to do this because that would spread the work around by one additional staff member. So when I talk to deans and the like, I can give slides that show things like this. This is fiscal 2020 and 2021 with the value going up by 36%. So, and then admitting it's hard to, quantify the actual value of the support that we offer. Every year, the value of a CPU year, GPU year, storage varies a little bit. But it's always good to keep this in front of the people with the money. So a summary in a given year would look something like this when I'm talking to the VPRI. And I also break this down by faculty for when I go to talk to a dean. So I can say out of that 4.7 million, the faculty of underwater basket weaving was the recipient of $750,000 worth of resources for which you paid nothing, and it took up no space in any of the buildings that your faculty inhabits. We also track training. This is for our fiscal year 2021. We theme our communications like the picture at the top. And so we track the number of events we held, the number of attendees, the number of training hours in the events as a total, and then of course multiply that by the number of attendees to get attendee hours. We hold basically the equivalent of a training summer school 3 times a year because we believe that a master's student should be able to get training more than just twice. Train users also submit fewer of the simple tickets of, how do I log in and all these sorts of things. Most of our staff are trained carpentries instructors, and we record our boot camp sessions so that people can go back to the one that they attended, or if they're out of sequence and waiting in that 3 or 4 month period for training, they can actually watch a previous session that may align with what they're needing to cover. So with that, that was a pretty quick fly through, and I could take questions now, or do we want to hold them to the end perhaps?
I think we can hold the questions to the end. I think that would be.
That sounds good.
Yeah, thanks. Patrick, Dave.
Dave, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, happy to. I didn't prepare any additional slides this week. From the last presentation, I'll sort of also say what Scott just said. We do that too. I mean, it's essential. These are some essential operational metrics that we need to justify, how our resources get used. So we definitely do all of that. But like I said last time, calling what we do a strategy is probably a stretch. So we have a lot of operational and tactical metrics and reporting metrics that are obviously very important, but we've yet to really integrate them into our strategy, right? So what's our overall strategic objectives and how can we use our metrics to support that? So what we are in the process of doing in Sizzle, which is our part of NCAR with the computing lab, is we're starting with our self-imposed or self-defined, success criteria. These are the 4 things that we say we must do to be successful. And I can share a document that's in process just to give a sense of what I'm talking about here. So we define our success criteria, for example, one of them being provide and develop innovative Earth system science-focused computing and data services to accelerate scientific breakthroughs and expand access. Whether you like that or not, that's what we collectively came up with as one of our success criteria. So what we're looking at now is, well, how do we demonstrate that with metrics? How do we demonstrate that success? And you can see the bullet list here I added was, well, okay, if that's our success, then we need to measure how we provide services, develop services, how innovative they are, some measure of their innovativeness, how they're Earth system science focused. Can we demonstrate that with metrics? How do we accelerate science breakthroughs, and how do we expand access? So we haven't really gotten there yet. We're in the process of having this conversation. And obviously there's some, providing services is a lot of the operational metrics. Are the systems up? Who's using them? How available are they? At the data center, what's the power utilization effectiveness? Those sorts of things help support elements like providing services. But innovativeness is another area that we as a national center want to demonstrate. Similarly, being Earth system science focused for NCAR is very important, yet we don't have easy metrics that say we are Earth system science focused. Now I can show allocations data that says all the work we do is in the Earth system sciences, but that's sort of a fait accompli by we only allow Earth system science work on the system. So saying that that's what's on the system is sort of, a bit circular logic. But how else is the system focused toward the Earth system sciences? How do we measure that? How do we measure those kinds of aspects of the system, which reflect our value as a national center, as opposed to, say, how do we add value to campus centers where researchers may be doing their work? We're working through this now. It's a lot of elements to this, and understanding how do we use, data we collect, user survey data, other parts of our processes, measuring things that we haven't regularly measured at the moment. And what do we need to start measuring in order to reflect these success criteria and demonstrate that we are successful by our own terms, on our own terms. That's where we're currently working at the moment. And we're just starting there. I've done similar things with Exceed and Access as well, where you start with your goals and then define measures that demonstrate you're achieving or pursuing those goals. It's not, I would say this is a challenging approach to defining metrics, because like I said, some of these are more difficult to find quantitative measures, and it requires some creativity to define how do we define Earth system science focused in a way that we can both quantify, demonstrate, and then show we're actually doing that. And so I am gonna, I think, just stop there at the moment, but I'm happy to discuss further this approach, or as again, last time my presentation is from last time shows a lot of similar metrics that Scott just reported, and we do absolutely need to also use those to demonstrate the operational capabilities. And in fact, if you look at this list, how we, there's also categories for just service and operation metrics that we want to capture to say, here's what we do and deliver, as well as how do we ourselves as a lab perform. And there's things like how are we against our, how do we do against hitting our budget numbers and other things like that. So those two are other categories that we're working on. But I think for in the interest of time and encouraging some discussion, I'll stop there.
All right, thanks, Dave. Patrick.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to tell a story about a little bit of the origin and what we went through and how we decided to use metrics in the early phases of building a program for research computing when I was at Berkeley. And this started, back in May 2013. There was actually no centralized research computing program at UC Berkeley. There was a bunch of departmental clusters, and this is a story you'll have heard in a number of places. We did a whole series of forums, basically a series of faculty. A group of faculty went to our vice chancellor for research and said, look, we need some help here. We're getting hurt on grants, and we need to do something about this. We did a bunch of forums, gathered a bunch of input. We heard that, we saw computational intensive research was spanning all sorts of disciplines and was growing. We had an Institute of Data Science that had all kinds of examples beyond traditional HPC use cases. The projects and the PIs had no common point of institutional support, and they really needed some help there, especially for early stage faculty or research projects and in domains that didn't traditionally fund these resources. The campus had no institutional access to compute resources for courses on computational methods. And this was a growing concern even back then in terms of how to support training of graduate and undergraduate students. The PIs were reporting that the funding agencies favored projects that managed compute and data resources in institutional infrastructure. And there were some rejected proposals that had comments about the lack of an institutional commitment to long-term support and such as that. So we had all this background kinds of issues that led to an initiative to build up this program. And so the metrics that we were gathering were definitely influenced by a lot of that origin, including the fact that as a new program and one that was looking at all these emerging needs, we also had a lot of folks from a lot of departments outside of the traditional physical and life sciences who were concerned that, in their words, they were going to be taxed again to support the sciences. And they were very concerned about having support broadly on campus and not just the people who currently had their departmental clusters and would benefit from this. So, I think that context is important in terms of understanding, how we approached both metrics gathering and metrics reporting. And so a lot of it, what we were doing when we thought about this was how to report impact, recognizing that our audience went beyond folks who really understood clusters. So we definitely did things like tracked growth of users and cores and contributions to the condo program. Those were very important to show that we had uptake and that, in fact, a lot of our cluster was actually being contributed by PIs, that it wasn't just the campus buying a lot of equipment and giving it away to people. And so we had some of those traditional things that our CIO, who actually understood high performance computing, and some of the other folks did understand. But when we would come to budget time each year, we had an original 3-year budget agreement between our CIO, our VCR, and the chancellor to fund an initial phase of this. But this was also a period where Berkeley was under a lot of budget pressure. There was about $180 million structural deficit that the central organization of the UC said they were not going to help out with. So there was successive years of 5 to 10% budget cuts across the campus. And, faculty don't take those budget cuts. So that all came down on the staff side and on programs. And so we were always defending our budget, and we were always worried about telling a story that would allow us to retain that budget. So what I will do is show you an old impact report that was what we produced 3 years into the program, which is when we were coming up to renewal of that initial budget ask. And here we go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, so basically it was a very short document telling a story of what we were doing. Okay, and we started out just talking about the traditional thing of what grants were supported, and the approach we took was to actually have a survey and then extrapolate from that, and then to back that up, we actually went to the folks who were doing sponsored projects and did a data dump out of their world and cross-referenced that to our users and came up with a number that at that time was about $600 million in awarded grants that we were supporting. And of course, we couldn't take credit for that, but it was a number that we could explain, look, there's a lot of grant money that's depending on our program. We did the same kind of thing where we did a survey on publications and then extrapolated based upon the response rate of our users on the surveys. But you'll see that we quickly went beyond that into some stories. And one of the biggest ones was recruitment and retention. And let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. We asked faculty who were users specifically about recruitment and retention cases. And every time we got called in on one of those, we took careful notes and gathered quotes. And so we had both some numbers of 15 faculty recruitment cases that we had participated in that past year, And then some stories, saying, well, I'm just coming into the astronomy department and access to Salvio helped with my recruitment. It was great to be able to have language about the fact that a computing allowance in our offer. These things turned out to be really fairly impactful in terms of us telling the story of what we were doing. We also tracked all the courses that we're leveraging. And remember, this is a very new program at this year. So these numbers are not huge, but we were 3 years in at this point. And so to be able to demonstrate that we were having an impact with our initial budget was important and made a difference to people. We asked people specifically in the survey, okay, how important is the research computing program? And this included both the cluster as well as support for cloud computing and scalable desktop environments for social scientists and humanists. And we just said, how important is it? And we were able to, get a really overwhelming response. This is really important to us. So we had faculty telling the administration, you got to support this. And when we're defending our budget, that was really huge. Then I mentioned this issue of the sort of cultural context. A big piece of what we were talking about was how many different departments and the breadth of departments across campus that we supported. And so, we have these two graphs. One, the lower one shows the utilization by domain, and we would just map domains up into what NSF considers the science domains plus arts and humanities. And you can see arts and humanities consume a tiny proportion, and social sciences also a pretty low proportion. What's interesting is that they consumed a big proportion in the upper graph of consulting, and this is not uncommon, right? You have sort of an inverse relationship between consulting needs and the ability to consume compute because of the faculty's experience with and having grown up through this. But what we were able to show was that across all these different domains, we had utilization, we had people coming to us for training and things like that. We also had a bunch of quotes in there, and then we carefully listed out all the different departments and labs across the campus that we were supporting, and we had about 80 of them 3 years in. And that again was so we could make the case to the deans of social sciences and the deans of art and humanities that we were having an impact in their world, so that they wouldn't fight us on budget when we were going through lots of very difficult budget negotiations. The last thing was we did these active profiles of faculty, where we found some science journalism and science English double major undergraduates, and we hired them in to go and interview a lot of our top users. And we did these longer profiles, but then from those we could pull these golden quotes in, and you've heard lots of people talk about the impact of these quotes, but we had a lot of these quotes there saying, this is our world, this is our lab. If you take away this resource, we're not going to be able to do our research. And anything that they would say about the team helping them out was really powerful. So you might think, okay, are these traditional metrics in that sense? And some of them are and some of them aren't. And I don't mean in any way to diminish the importance of capturing traditional metrics and making the case that your operations are really solid. But what we were finding, especially early on, and especially in times of budget crunch, the stories around impact ended up being our most powerful thing. And a little bit of that was based upon a lot of learning and coaching I got when I was first taking on that program and talking to a lot of our colleagues around the country. And I'm thinking in particular of Kurt Hilligus at Princeton, who said, we carefully tracked all these metrics for all the faculty, publications, grants, everything. And we thought we'd done a really nice job of showing exactly what we were doing. And we brought it to our, I think it was their provost. And the provost said to him, well, that's all great, but are the faculty happy? And in the end, that's a lot. That was a lot of what it came down to is, okay, can you tell a story around making researchers happy? So again, I think what Dave and Scott talked about is so important, so that you actually have the data to justify that you actually know what you're doing and you're doing a good job, and that you have the data inform specific strategic directions in terms of growth areas and areas of emphasis. I just want to emphasize how important those sort of soft metrics are in telling your story. And I'll let it go with that.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks Scott, Patrick, and Dave for sharing their perspectives. I'm going to open the floor for question. Before I do that, I had actually a generic question to the panelists and then to rest of the attendees on the call. So I have been looking at implementing automated processes based on the outcome of a given metric, especially on the operations side of things. Say, for example, that NSF has those two requirements that your system should be, well, NSF funded, on NSF funded systems, that system should be up 95% of the time, and the job failure rate should be no more than 4%. So in order to implement those things, I'm looking at automating those things. If we can reduce the downtime that scheduled downtime that we have if we are not meeting the target. So do you have any of such automated processes in place? Or do you envision putting those in place, at least from operational point of view?
Well, I can say that I'll add that, NCAR does have a similar self-imposed metric of 98% availability, and I believe those numbers are tracked automatically. Now, does anything happen like automatically as a result? So if we go below 98, what happens? That's a good question. I'm not sure if there's an automatic action we can take, but I'm sure people watch it on a regular basis to say, hey, because there's contractual conditions we can use with the vendor to say, hey, you need to deliver, additional resources or support to help meet this number. So yes and no. Yes, there are some automatically collected ones due to, those kinds of similar values, but then I'm not sure we react automatically in any particular way with at least with the system.
All right, thanks, Dave. Anyone else has any perspective on this? If not, there's a bunch of questions that have been asked in the chat. Patrick, there's a question for you.
So yeah, I responded to the one about getting access to the report. We've been trying to get example reports and templates as part of a resource that we would post up on the Nexus. It's been a discussion for a while. On the students, yeah, that the program of actually having some journalism students in was a great piece of what we did with the undergraduate interns. So we had CS interns that were helping out with basic stuff of compiling and things like that. But yeah, that we had 2 or 3. One was a English and integrative biology double major. And she was great. We got her into Jennifer Doudna's lab, which was a big thrill for her, and she interviewed some of them. I had the benefit of one of my senior IT architects was actually a novelist. He worked half-time on IT architecture and half-time writing. And so he helped with editing. And so we could get a lot of material that the undergrads had put together, and he helped clean it up just a little bit in terms of voice. But we had a series of those interns that went out and did these interviews, and they turned out to be partly for our impact, but a lot of it was since we were trying to get people to adopt this, people who had their private clusters, and we needed to convince them that this was a really good program. They were going to listen to other faculty long before they were going to listen to us. And so having more of these stories from the perspective of users was really useful. Plus, they turned out to be a really fun and motivating thing for the team, because the team mostly hears about problems, right? And when you get these love letters from researchers who say, wow, this thing is really great and it makes such a difference, it was a big motivator for the team. And so that was something we hadn't anticipated, but turned out to be a big benefit that I would encourage others to consider. And it was interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was a really fun thing to find these students and give them this access as well. And they were excited because they got real bylines on unpublished stuff. So.
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to comment to what Patrick closed with about measuring the happiness of users. I definitely agree about that. And I saw in the chat that Scott noted that quantifying happiness is a challenge. I mean, that's one of my favorite metrics is user satisfaction. And it's there's, don't underestimate the value of a survey just to ask them, are you happy? I personally, I do it in a way where we ask ours every year if they're happy, just to check in, like, are you still happy? Did anything change to make you unhappy? But rather than asking one question, I ask it in a range of questions to sort of say, are you happy with this part of what we do? Are you happy with this part of what we do? So you can get an overall assessment, but you can also say, oh, look, we need to do some work on, say, they're not as happy with our documentation. Okay, so that's how we can focus our efforts to improve that user happiness and find ways to make their lives better, which, overall, helps out generally. So I do that with Access as well. We ask them about different facets of the allocations process we work on, which is a big focus. But yeah, user satisfaction is ultimately what, that and the science is usually what you're wanting to deliver. So make sure you're making your researchers happy.
And I'm expecting a question, Scott, I'll give it, but just, yes, we have been trying to gather examples of those surveys. That's something else we've heard from people is, hey, can we see what survey you did? I think what Dave's describing is a great approach to a yearly survey with some nuance. We did borrow an idea from the marketing world who said there's only one question that really matters in the long run. And it's, would you recommend this to somebody else? And it's what's called the Net Promoter Score. And it's something you can track year to year and actually see, how many people are real advocates of your program, how many people are just okay, and how many people are detractors. And it also gives you audiences to go focus on. Find those advocates and get them to be active advocates for you, and then find the detractors and figure out why they're unhappy. But that's, you can read about Net Promoter Score and how to do that. But it turns out to be a really useful thing to include. And yes, we're trying to find people who run these surveys and get them to contribute examples so we can put together a resource for folks.
We actually survey people that submit tickets. And so we get responses that the help desk coordinator nationally collects up, and the neutral and above, so the neutral, good, whatever, are shared in a document on Slack. Gregory, I don't remember if that's monthly or quarterly. Up here. Thank you. And so that's out in front of all 200 odd staff members. And then of course, if there's a problem in a response, that's sent directly to that individual and their supervisor, so that they can, address whatever the issue might have been, whether it's actually a failure of support or just a user who had their undergarments in a knot that day, whatever the case may be. But it's actually quite valuable, and that's not really quantification, but it's always good and for people to see their names where, Allie gave great service, very quick response. I was surprised to get response on a weekend, all these sorts of things. Although that does set expectations that I don't particularly care for. I don't want people to be at work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
What do other folks, some of the, aside from those of us who've been speaking, there's a bunch of people out there who I see all your names who are or have run centers. Are there other things, other metrics or other ways you used metrics that you thought, we haven't really talked about?
Can I throw one in?
Yes, thank you, Henry.
We actually had an external advisory blue ribbon panel come in. We've done this twice now, so it seems to be a decadal thing. But and we had defined an aspirational peer group, and so I went to the websites of the research computing organizations for the aspirational peer institutions, and I collected data on core counts, flop counts, GPU counts expressed as A100 equivalents, using various benchmark data for that, and staff head counts. I think those were our big metrics. And I calculated for the aspirational peer group what was the median, and then compared that to where we are on those things. And in particular, I not only looked at raw core count and teraflop count, but I also looked at those numbers normalized per $1 million of annual research expenditure. And those numbers were very compelling for the external group. So much so that they asked others within my institution to provide similar metrics for items that were relevant to their areas. I found that comparing to the aspirational peer group was something that people found very compelling. Are we better than the aspirational peer group? About the same? Significantly worse? What we found was we were somewhat better on most of the metrics and half as good on headcount. And so one of the big feedbacks we got from that group, from the external panel, was you need more people.
Which is a wonderful recommendation to receive and pass on to your leadership.
Yes, agreed. And I would make a general comment about that as well. No matter what you say about your institution and its research computing needs, it's automatically misperceived as self-serving. Well, partially misperceived, I suppose. Whereas bringing in an external group to say it is vastly more compelling. If they're hearing from people who have position titles that they respect, because they won't know the people as a general rule, but if they have position titles that they respect, and those folks are saying the exact same thing that you are saying to your institutional leadership, it carries a lot more weight than you saying it.
Henry, do you see the question in chat to you? Vessel asks if you are.
Now I do.
Yeah.
Were you able to get more people based on the recommendation? Well, the recommendation only came in December. So the answer is kind of so far. It's going to take time. I certainly was able to get agreement and consensus that we need more people. That's separate from, am I able to get more positions opened up? We were able to get one more position opened up quickly. And then we were able to get some student position funding as well. I think that's a little easier to get in the sense that since students have very high turnover, there's less financial exposure to the institution. If they're running out of money, they can always say, okay, you don't get the student position starting next year, right? We don't have any new full-time position lines yet, but I do think that that's going to come.
Scott, you had a comment?
Related to that, I think one of our benefits of being so data informed around making cases around staff is it's better when you're competing for dollars to say, I can hire someone at the University of Alberta to be a research computing staff member and get 1.0 FTE for 0.6 of a salary, whereas the guy in enterprise computing or networking has to pay 1.0 for 1.0. So it helps set that expectation when you're competing for the local resources. It also helps when you're making a case to people that you're not directly reporting to. Like in my case, I don't report directly to the VPR. That's, a dotted line. I report up through IT. And so informing them that, we add staff, but it doesn't add an entire salary and benefits obligation to the university. They look at that favorably as well. Especially when you're in some steel cage death match kind of budgetary arguments with your peers. 'Cause
So I actually have one last question. With the amount of data that we collect, it's exploding everywhere. And based on that, is anyone using some sort of AI or ML tools to parse through the data and come up with some valuable insights into the data, or that's still a distant future?
I have, my CSV file that comes in. I've got the structure in Google Data Studio. I guess Tableau users would have something similar. I think as those platforms begin to involve machine learning in, how they present things, that's when I would end up picking it up. But I would never, put any of my data up in like ChatGPT for helping me do this. I'd be far more likely to spin up a VM in Google Cloud Platform and make use of the tools, but keep the data internal.
Thanks, Scott. Dave.
Yeah, that's a great question, Amit, and I think it's going to happen one way or the other. I mean, operationally, we're not doing it yet, although we've started looking at pieces of it to understand patterns of user behavior using the storage systems or the compute systems. And there may be something in there, though. I think it's just at the exploratory stage at NCAR, but inevitably, I think it's going to happen. It's a question of, when, but not yet.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else who has at least dipped their toes into this use of ML tools, AI tools? I think then that's a good point to stop. If there are no further questions, then I'm going to turn it back to Patrick and Melissa to wrap things up. Thanks. Yeah, and obviously thanks to all the speakers and thanks to all the participants for the discussion.
Thanks you, Amit, for hosting this and helping to put this together. Really interesting discussion, I think, for everybody. We appreciate everybody's contributions. There's some interesting threads going on in chat. I'm really glad to hear that CAST is thinking about revisiting a survey that they did a number of years ago, looking at ways of thinking about efficiency in managing HPC centers. That would be a welcome thing. So always good discussions going on here. Any closing comments or anything from anybody? All right. Well, thanks once again for joining us. Hope to see a bunch of you at PERC later this month. And for everybody who can't make it, as well as those who can, please join us in August, where we'll talk a little bit about different impressions from different perspectives of what we heard, and hopefully share some of the insights that we get there. And so, Melissa, any other closing comments?
Nope, this is great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Amit. And as always, our intrepid note taker, Vasella, thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.